Well, welcome. I just finished a really interesting discussion, as they all are, with a group of women who are looking at some proposed old studies and new stories by Charles Eisenstein. And we're seeing a lot of correlations, not just in the work that we're doing. Some of the women are also involved in the study group of Yunka Porter's Sand Talk. So we're seeing correlations between that and with Eisenstein's news stories. But we're also seeing today, we started to see how a lot of these efforts that these men are calling for in these books are happening here in the United States, probably happening all over the world, but we did come up with some resources. So I thought, a lot of times when we read a book like this, or even we get into a small group like this, we think, well, it's just us. So the value of being us two, us three, us four in conversation gets us out of the myopic, just thinking about it yourself. So we start to realize that more than one person not more than me, is thinking about an issue and seeing it as important for the future of humanity. And today that happened. Today we got all sorts of resources, what they call bridging groups, that they are helping people be in conversation. So if you look at the why conversation? Well, in conversation, we actually listen to the stories that people have for kind of how they've come to think about the world and different issues. And it's only in hearing the stories we see their place in the world, and we see the interactions, the more complex interactions of activity and interactions, and the adaptations that people have made in order to create a better future for themselves or their families or their communities. If you look at the old story today that we were talking about, it says the universe is like a machine, best understood by analyzing the action of mathematically describable forces on its parts. To understand something, you take it apart. And which really means the model of the Ford, creating a Ford on the assembly line, is pretty much how everything else started to analyze things. So if you want to analyze something, you try and isolate it into its parts, and you study the part. Now, what that leaves out is the interaction between the parts. So when you look at the opposite of that, is what they call whole system thinking, which is you're studying something as it interacts with all of its parts and all of those parts of other things that interact with the parts. And that's a hard one to get our head around, because we really haven't, in the Western society, we haven't been trained to do that. We've been trained to be in isolated parts thinking. And if I was thinking about Taoist, the look of the Taoists as at the physical system of the and the energetic system of human being, and we're always looking at the intersections of the heart on the different organs, on the stomach on its other organs, on the liver on the different organs, kidneys on different organs, and they're constantly feeding and growing one, or depleting, or making it difficult for another one. And it's the art of that particular approach to the care of the body is learning to get to balance. The art of understanding a complex system is not to reduce it or redact it to some simple form. It's to try and understand all the different forces that are acting on any situation, on any group. So if you look at what Sand Talk says, or Yucca Porta in Sand Talk says, is that, one, we have to maintain diversity. So diversity really represents all the different experiences that there are in the world, whether it be from a different racial, religion, gender, age group, to all the diversity of nature, that we have to make connections with those. In other words, it's not me by myself. I'm not going to be able to be part of a dynamic whole or dynamic matrix if what I'm doing is simply talking to myself. A lot of navel gazing. So we have to connection. So if I can make us two, you and me, make a connection, then that establishes us within a matrix of you and another us two, them with another us two, and so on with myself. And before you know it, we're part of a dynamic matrix where the pattern, the energies that are flow in impact everybody. So there becomes larger patterns that affect us. And that probably goes all the way out into the universe and then back and forth. So we're in this dynamic flow. The more that we are, one, in connection with others, and two, in interaction with others. And when we're in interaction with others, we pay attention to as much as we can of all the things that are moving. And so you end up shifting and adapting to the new information, the new knowledge, the new energies moving in, while you're maintaining your own internal truth, your unique and essential self. So from Sandtalk or Yucca Porta's position, all those have to be operative in order to create a sustainable culture. From Eisenstein's position, you really have to look at what he calls emergent qualities of whole in order to understand what's going on the smaller level behavior of the parts. The way he had his new story, he said, the universe is alive. Reductionist causal explanations cannot grasp the phenomenon of life. Reductionist is redaction, bringing it back, something down to a simpler and simpler explanation. It might play out for an explanation, but it doesn't explain what is actually going on. In fact, it makes it so simplistic that it's no longer operative. So in his case, he's saying emergent qualities of the whole, these larger patterns that we become aware of beyond the people centricity, this people focus, explains the behavior of the parts. So what we want to do is play it from both ends. In other words, you and I and how we talk with each other, we want that to grow as conversation grows. And we also want to pay attention to this larger field within which we exist, whether it's the sun impacting how people do, whether it's the astrology, larger forces of astrology impacting, whether it's climate change. What are all the ideas that are flowing through and the energies flowing through that impact how we act? Now, what I found out during this call was that there's lots of groups out there that are doing these, what they call bridging discussions, where people have to listen. And what I found out is they're all based on what the circle way of talking. In other words, everybody gets some conversation, and there isn't a positioning taking place as much as an explaining of story that kind of brought you to the thinking that you're in at the moment. So some of those groups are, I think there's 3 groups that are really big: Bridge Alliance, Citizens Connect, and Listen First Coalition. And if you look those up, you'll find ways that you can connect with people in your community. If you want to be part of it, I think, because, I've been telling everybody, well, get in conversation, but sometimes it feels really scary to get in conversation with people who want to argue you down and argue you over to their position. And I don't care which side, and if again, side is a really linear black and white, true or false positioning. We really have to listen. And I love the idea of listening to people's stories. But here's some other groups that you can pay attention to: Living Room Conversations, National Listening Association, the National Coalition of Dialogue and Deliberation. And they have actually a toolkit that you can learn to have collaborative discussion. And the interactive, it's something, it's the interactivity foundation of the collaborative, which are publishing a collaborative discussion toolkit, and they are part of the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. It's time we put energy into this. And obviously there are a lot of groups that have realized this already. I have come late to the table as far as really wanting to be in conversation and really wanting to be in conversation where we listen to each other, where we hear our stories, and we get a broader idea of all the ways that people can experience the world. And everyone wanting in those groups to create a more sustainable future for not just ourselves, but for our children, our grandchildren, and for the generations rising. So I hope you think about it, pay attention, record this and get the name of those groups and look them up, or just get in good conversation with others in your world so that you know more than your story, more than your perspective, like the 5 blind men around the elephant. You don't just stand and hold the leg and say that's all there is of an elephant, or the trunk and all that there is of the elephant. You take turns to feel the other parts and hear the stories and find out that there is more out there that is the larger pattern that affects us all, instead of just the part that you personally have known. So take care and have a wonderful day, week, month. Take good care. Bye-bye.